All right, we're going to look at this idea of influential observations with a data set that we've used before in Chapter 4. So this is the data set on airline maintenance. Airlines have increasingly outsourced the maintenance of their airplanes to other companies. A concern voiced by critics is that the maintenance may be less carefully done, so that outsourcing creates a safety hazard. In addition, flight delays are often due to maintenance problems. So one might look at government data on the percent of major maintenance outsourced and the percentage of flight delays blamed on the airline to determine if these concerns are justified. This was done back in 2005, 2006, and it seemed at that time that the data supported the concerns the critics had, that there were more maintenance issues and so there were more flight delays. So the question that we considered in Chapter 4 was, does the 2012 data still support those concerns? And it didn't. It looked like actually that outsourcing really came up with less delays. But what we're interested in now is whether any of those points in that data set could have been influential. So this is the scatter plot we created from the outsourcing by airlines. And the 2 points that we're really interested in are actually the 2 points on opposite ends here. So we're interested in this point from Frontier Airlines and this other point on the far side from Hawaiian Airlines. So we're going to switch over to Excel and do a little bit of work in there to see if either of these are influential points. So I'll meet you over in Excel with the airline data. Okay, so here is our airline data. You'll notice that I've replicated the data set, so there are 4 copies of it, and each copy is slightly different. So we're actually going to look at this data set if we remove Hawaiian, if we remove Frontier, and if we remove both Frontier and Hawaiian. So I already brought over the scatter plot from Chapter 4, and I added the line in the equation here. So I will find these predictions. So I'm supposed to make a prediction if 79.1% of the major maintenance is outsourced. So I'll do equals negative 0.1285 times 79.1% plus 21.815. So that gives me a prediction of 11.6% of flights delayed. And then if we only outsource 0.1%, so 1/10 of 1%, how much are we going to expect to be delayed? So we could certainly retype that the same way I just did. Or if I click here, I can copy this formula either from the cell itself, or I can go up just above where the letters are labeling each column, and I can copy that formula there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it into the prediction for 0.1. And then I'm just going to change, instead of 79.1, it'll be 0.1. So that's just kind of a nice way, if all the numbers stay the same except for 1, to just make a quick change there. So if we outsource less than 1% of our major maintenance, they're predicting that we'll get 21.8% of flights are delayed. So it's seeming like that the outsourcing is really helping minimize delays. All right, so I would like you to repeat this process. Oh, I forgot the correlation coefficient. Let me grab that quick. So equals CORREL. We'll highlight those. So we get a correlation coefficient here of about negative 0.488. All right, so I'd like you to repeat that process for the other 3 sets here, and then we're going to go through them and look at them and see if they're actually, if we can decide if any of them are actually influential. So go ahead and pause the video and give those a try. Get some more practice with those regression lines. All right, so welcome back to the airline data. Hopefully this all worked out well for you, and I'm going to go ahead and make these numbers a little bit bigger so we can see them better. All right, so looking across the board at these, one of the things I want to look at is which one of these changed the correlation coefficient the most. So as I look here, the original correlation coefficient was negative 0.48. If I remove Hawaiian, it actually cut that correlation coefficient in half. So I would say that Hawaiian is going to be an influential point just based on that alone. If I go over to Frontier, I notice that the correlation coefficient is almost exactly the same, negative 0.47. And so it is not quite as influential as Hawaiian. Hawaiian is very influential. Frontier moved it a little bit, but not much at all. What's interesting though is if I remove both Frontier and Hawaiian, the correlation coefficient gets even worse. Now we're down to negative 0.1. And a little bit of that is just because we don't have very many points left, but those points are big, almost more of an oval than they do a straight line. So the 2 points together, definitely influential. Hawaiian on its own, absolutely influential. Frontier on its own, not quite as influential. So that's one way of doing it, is looking at that correlation coefficient. Another is just kind of eyeballing these lines. So if I look at these, the no Frontier and the outsourcing by airlines look fairly similar as far as lines go. But when I compare that to the no Hawaiian or to the no Hawaiian Frontier, both of those, instead of having that steep downhill, flattened out quite a bit. So even just visually, the line is quite a bit different. All right, so that wraps up most of the skills from chapter 5. I have one more video with a little bit of lecture notes and warnings, and then that'll be it for chapter 5, and you'll be ready for the homework and quiz.